Barbara Streisand is a ball buster? Yeah, I can kind of see it. Anyway, welcome in. It is Thursday. And Thursday nights. Currently, I'm reading mysteries. That may change in another week or so, because I think there are only 5 stories left in this book. And then I'll have to find something else to read. I've got an idea. I may read a story that may or may not be public domain, but it's coming up on Halloween, sorta. So it may be a horror story, or at least horror adjacent. But Friday we'll stick with fairy tales. My captions, they crack me up sometimes. But anyway, how's your week been, Guilty? Tiring? Well, yeah, I can see that. Money? Yeah. You gotta get the money for all the artwork. I really need to find better music for while in here in the bookstore. Not that Mysterious Moments isn't a good song, but I don't need it all the time. I can need to find better stuff for my Be Right Back screen, too. Maybe I need to find some lo-fi jazz station to play during breaks. So I gotta have something to do with the bookstore. But anyway. Let's see. It is the 31st. So 10 days from now, I will do another gaming stream. I believe it's a Sunday. I have to look at the calendar. Yeah, it's a Sunday. But August 10th will be the 4th anniversary of me streaming at all. As it is, I'm already having to find more places to put my archives. As I had a 3 terabytes drive that I put in my computer just to store my archive, and I've almost filled it. So I'm gonna have to do an archive drive every 4 years at this rate. I don't know which is really more important. The anniversary of me starting, or the anniversary of me getting affiliate. Because my affiliate anniversary would be December 19th. But as far as my streaming anniversary, it's going to be the 10th. I don't know. I'll have to do something. I mean, if anyone's ever looked at my gaming channel on YouTube, you might see something that I'll be doing for gaming streams. I don't mean the headsets I was wearing last night. I actually made a transparent PNG of my actual headset to wear during a gaming stream. That was my Razer Black Shark 2. That was in that picture I showed you the other day on Discord. Best gun with white stripes. Not that I know what the difference between the fish are, but whatever. What time is it? 9:09. I guess I should get over to the study. I really wish I could find the page turning transition that I want to use, but I haven't been able to find one. So, we'll just fade. I think it would on fade. No, it's uncut. That sucks. Okay, my chat window is a little bit more transparent because I did that for the gaming stream last night. Can't believe I streamed for almost 6.5 hours, but I finished the game, so that was the important part. But let's see, it is 9:10, so I should probably get into the book. I'm going to try to read 3 stories, unless I get tired after the second one. But it will be a little bit longer stream tonight, because it's 2 different authors, so they have different styles, different characters, which unfortunately means different voices. But anyway, our first story for tonight, Skin of My Tooth, is memoirs by his confidential clerk, compiled and edited by Baroness Orczy. Number 5, The Case of Mrs. Norris. I've always known Skin of My Tooth to hold the axiom that justice is invariably on the side of the cleverest lawyer. I might as well at this point record the fact that he held the learned gentleman of the bar in complete and withering contempt. They are a necessary evil to the high courts, he would say, but then, to my esteemed employer, everybody in the court of law, from the judge downwards, was a necessary evil. He would have liked some arrangement by which he could have argued out a criminal case with another lawyer, that side to win who got the best of the argument. I can recall one or two narrow shaves where the judge and a jury's decision really seemed a matter of tossing a halfpenny. It might go either way, and my chief fully deserved the nickname which the public had now universally bestowed upon him. But of the many interesting cases with which Skin of My Tooth was associated after the Duffield peerage case had brought his name so prominently before the public, none, I think, seemed at the first glance to intricate, and demonstrated his weird gifts more marvelously than the case of Mrs. Norris. She was a pale, delicate-looking woman, I should say not more than 25 years of age, and no doubt among her own friends would be called pretty. Of course, when Skin of My Tooth saw her in Holloway, she was evidently worn out with sleepless nights, and half crazy with the horror of the position in which she found herself. Her speech was very incoherent, with a curious mixture of self-accusations and vigorous protestations of innocence, together with the marked obscenity of her general attitude. Would have irritated any man less devoted to his calling than Skin of My Tooth. The facts, as far as they were known to the police and to the public, and as far as Mrs. Norris herself was willing to admit, were briefly these. On Thursday, April 17th, the inhabitants of Sherland Mansions, Malda Vale, were startled at 11 o'clock at night by loud screams proceeding from one of the flats. Very soon, the door of number 22 was thrown violently open, and Mrs. Norris, who occupied the flat with her husband, came out on the landing, loudly calling for help. To the neighbors, who immediately responded to her call, she seemed like one demented. Her eyes were starting out of her head. Her face was livid, and with trembling fingers she was pointing towards her own apartments, whilst, in answer to every query, her quivering mouth murmured repeatedly, "There, in the sitting room." At last, Mr. Daniel, from number 23, less nervous and excitable than the other neighbors, made up his mind to ascertain what it was that had so completely shattered Miss Norris's nerves. One glance into the sitting room, where the electric light was fully turned on, told him the whole gruesome tale. The body of Mr. Norris was lying on the floor, with his throat cut. There was no doubt that he was dead. The body was rigid, the face livid, whilst the eyes stared up at the ceiling with a look of infinite terror. In his hand, the unfortunate man held, tightly clutched, the razor with which, evidently, he had put an end to his own life. Following Mr. Daniel's example, a few of the neighbors had crowded into the small flat. A young fellow from number 20, who owned a bicycle, suddenly bethought himself that perhaps a doctor or the police would be needful at this juncture, and so he went off, leaving a select few to gaze awestruck at the helpless and rigid body, and to offer well-meant but wholly ineffectual comfort to the half-crazed young widow. It was, of course, very late at night when at last the detective inspector from the station, accompanied by 2 constables and the police divisional surgeon, came in response to the call from the cyclist. After that, the crowd of eager and inquisitive neighbors had perforce to retire within the precincts of their respective flats. From the very first, the general public refused to believe in the suicide theory. The morning papers already on the following day threw out vague hints of possible sensational developments. The coroner's inquest, held on Monday, only confirmed that already everyone had suspected, namely that Mr. Norris had been murdered. The doctor declared that the wound in his throat had not been caused by the sharp razor found clutched in the dead man's hand. It had been inflicted by a much blunter instrument. Now, no knife of any kind was found on the scene of the tragedy, but a few drops of blood were noticed by the detective inspector on the earthenware sink in the kitchen, showing that the murderer had washed his hands and his instrument there. Probably after that, he found the razor in the dressing room and placed it in the victim's hand in order to raise the question of suicide. But it was the examination of Mrs. Norris which furnished the truly sensational element of the tragedy. She repeated before the coroner that she had already told the police, namely, that on the fateful night she had been out to dine with a friend in the neighborhood of Swiss Cottage. She came home at 11 o'clock at night, and going straight into the sitting room, turning on the electric light, she saw her husband lying on the floor, dead. Horrified beyond measure, she had screamed for help. She, too, had first believed in the theory that Mr. Norris had for some unaccountable reason committed suicide. Certainly, he had no enemy, to her knowledge, and she professed herself quite unable to throw any light upon the mysterious affair. It appears, however, that her attitude when originally questioned by the police was so strange, her confusion and excitement so manifest, that Mason, the detective who had the charge of the case, set to work immediately to verify her statements. He saw the friend with whom Mrs. Norris had dined that evening of her husband's death, but he had also ascertained that she left the friend's house at 9:30. Pressed by the coroner, now she seemed absolutely unable to give any account as to how she spent her time between 9:30 and 11 p.m. She had walked about the streets, she said, but at the night of the 17th had been pouring wet. The statement was, to say the least, peculiar. Unfortunately for her, no one in the mansions had heard her come in. The outside doors not being closed until 11:30, anyone could come or go easily and unperceived. The owners of the other flats in the same building could not give the police much help in the matter. One statement in connection with the Norrises, however, was quite unanimous among all witnesses, namely, that the quarrels between husband and wife amounted to a positive scandal. According to Mr. Daniel, at number 23, scarcely a day passed when the Norris menage without a domestic squabble. It was generally supposed that the young wife's extravagance and love of dress, and the husband's ungovernable temper, were the causes of the disunion. On the very night of Mr. Norris's death, Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt, in the flat immediately below his, heard at 10:30 at night the sound of a scuffle overhead. So loud it was that Mrs. Wyatt suggested that her husband should go upstairs and intervene, as she was quite sure Mr. Norris was murdering his wife. I don't think that anyone could blame the police for the course they adopted in this very mysterious affair. They arrested Mrs. Norris on the charge of murdering her husband. Brought before the magistrate, she pleaded not guilty, and repeated her story with wonderful obstinacy. She had dined with a friend, and from 9:30 to 11 had walked about the streets alone. Her whole manner on the subject was confused in the extreme. There was something here that she wished to hide, was apparent to everybody. But the lie told against her, of course, and were it not for the fact that the magistrate was a peculiarly humane and kindly man, who took pity on her lonely position and remanded her so that she might obtain legal advice immediately, and there is no doubt that she would at once have been committed for trial. Part 2. It was at this point that Mrs. Norris's relations approached the skin of my tooth with a view that she should undertake her defense. The case had interested him from the first, and he was quite ready to give the unfortunate women the benefit of his great skill. He saw her in Holloway. She was obviously pleased to have his legal advice, and seemed inclined to be less reticent than she had been hitherto.
"I may have acted very thoughtlessly, Mr. Mulligan," she said, "but I had no one to advise me, and really, I've been half crazy with this horrible accusation being hanging over me."
I think you were very foolish to make such a secret of how you spent your time between 9:30 and 11 on that fateful night. An alibi in a case like yours is imperative. I hope that you have quite made up your mind to be absolutely frank with me.
I'm afraid that when you hear how simple the explanation is, you'll think me worse than foolish.
It doesn't matter what I think at this point, remarked Skin in My Tooth dryly.
After I left my friend at 9:30,
She began speaking, I thought, with a strange nervousness.
I went to see another friend in Hamilton Terrace with whom I stayed nearly 11 o'clock.
As you say, it is extremely simple, said Skin in My Tooth, who had noticed her curious and constrained manner, and was looking at her through his thick and fleshy eyelids. The alibi is quite perfect, of course. Your friend will corroborate the statement. She hesitated very palpably, then she added,
I took a hansom to go home. No doubt the cabinet can be found.
No doubt, but it was a dark night and the cabin may not be able to identify you accurately. Still, it is an additional evidence, your friend's being, of course, the most valuable. Will you give me her name and address that I may communicate with her immediately? Again, Mrs. Norris hesitated visibly for a moment before she replied.
Lady Ralph Morshampton, 196 Hamilton Terrace.
Her attitude was a puzzle to me, and I could see that Skin in My Tooth was both mystified and vexed. However, he dropped that point for the moment and questioned Mrs. Norris of the probable motive for the murder. The police tell me that the rooms had evidently been searched through and through, possibly for money or valuables. Do you know of anything that may have been tempted by murder?
Nothing, she replied almost emphatically. We were in very modest circumstances. We never kept money in the house beyond a sovereign or so, and we had no valuables of any kind.
And you cannot account for the wild search which was evidently made through the rooms for something? You know, the dressing bag was turned inside out, and the drawers emptied. Even the books in the bookcase were disturbed.
I don't understand it,
she replied with a return of that strange nervous willfulness which was so unaccountable, and which had already so much prejudiced her case.
I cannot account for any of it in any way.
With marked impatience, Skin in My Tooth rose to go. I could see that he was within an ace of throwing up the case, for it was clear, of course, that Mrs. Norris was not absolutely frank, even with him. But the case had gripped him, and this additional puzzle only aroused his further interest in it. It seemed literally to bristle with mysteries. He controlled his rising temper for the moment, and took leave of his client, promising to call again early the next morning. What does that woman lie to me? He said savagely the moment we were outside. She knows or guesses the motive of that murder, I'll swear. She is guilty herself, after all, or she's shielding a friend. And what in heaven's name has Lady Ralph Morshampton have to do with it? I, of course, could not answer these intricate questions, and returned to the Finsbury Square in silence. We found that during our absence from the office, a boy had introduced a visitor to Skin in My Tooth's private room. Lady, sir, he explained. She wouldn't give a name, but she wouldn't wait here and had to show her in. I followed my chief into his private office, where the visitor was waiting. She was a lady, very elegantly dressed, who rose with languid grace to greet Skin in My Tooth as he entered.
Mr. Mulligan,
she asked. That's my name, replied my chief as he drew an easy chair forward for her and seated himself at his desk, viewing his elegant visitor with more than professional interest. She seemed a little troubled at what to say next, and looked across at me, somewhat doubtfully. "My confidential clerk," explained Skin of My Tooth, "as trustworthy as myself. Still, if you wish it, he can go."
Oh, no, not at all. Since he has your confidence, I have nothing more to say. I did not leave my name with your office boy, Mr. Malkin, as I would wish, as far as possible, that my interview with you should remain confidential. I am Lady Ralph Mortonhampton. You no doubt know my husband by his name, and I came to see you about a matter connected with the murder of Mr. Norris in Sherland Mansions."
"Indeed," commented Skin of My Tooth.
"Yes,"
She continued with more composure.
"I know a good deal about this Mrs. Morris. She is accused of murdering her husband. As a matter of fact, I think I can explain to you the reason why that cruel and dastardly crime was committed."
"Indeed," repeated my employer, quite unmoved. "As a matter of fact, Mrs. Norris was in my house only an... Hold on. Oops.
"As a matter of fact, Mrs. Norris was in my house only an hour or so before she committed that awful crime. She was perusing a policy of blackmail against me, Mr. Mulligan, and finding that my poor husband would not be party to this ignoble policy, she made him its victim."
I don't quite understand."
"I must try to make it quite clear. Before my marriage, Mr. Mulligan, I was on stage, and as it happened, just before I was engaged to Lord Ralph Hampshire, a villainous scandal was circulating amongst my envious colleagues, coupling my name with that of Adam Norris, the young dramatic author of much promise. Fortunately, that scandal never reached the ears either of the Marquis of Camberley, my father-in-law, or of the exalted society of which I am about to become a member. I am the daughter of a gentleman, and had always acted in Shakespearean dramas only. Society, after my marriage, tolerated me from the first, but now, after strenuous efforts on my part, it has finally accepted me. I have a position within its circles which may envy. And meanwhile, Adam Norris also married. There is some unaccountable carelessness on his part, which amounts practically to sin. His wife got to know of that old and buried scandal annex himself and me. He had been a fool enough to keep my letters. I believe they were distinctly compromising. I really had not remembered them all, but Mrs. Norris, having caught sight of them once by accident, bethought herself of doing a bit of illicit traffic with them. She was inordinately fond of finery and gaiety, passions which her husband's somewhat modest position would not allow her to indulge in. She wrote to me one day, offering to sell me my old letters for a couple of £1,000, and a few introductions in good society. Now, Mr. Mulligan, I'm the wife of a very rich man, with plenty of money at my command with which to gratify any passing whim. In this case it was my whim to pay money down and regain possession of those letters sooner than allow my husband and my friends to know their contents. I wrote to Mrs. Norris asking her to come and see me Thursday evening, the 17th. She came about 10 o'clock, and we had a short interview, in which it was agreed between us that I should give her £4,000 and no introductions in exchange for the letters. I must tell you that she informed me that she had not got the letters. Her husband had them still, but she seemed to think that she would have no difficulty in obtaining possession of them. I could not tell you exactly at what hour she left me,"
concluded Lady Ralph Hampshire coldly.
"but I imagine that she went straight home, well, and that she had some difficulty in persuading her husband to give up those letters. What do you think yourself, Mr. Mulligan?"
"I really have not given that subject a thought. I merely came to you today, but... Hold on. Okay. Blech. I was merely wondering, Lady Morsampton, whether you are really convinced in your own mind that Mrs. Norris actually murdered her husband.
I really have not given that subject thought. I merely came to you today because I thought that probably she would have given you her own version of the interaction with me, and that you might take it into your head to cite me as a witness on her behalf. You will see for yourself, I am sure, that this would do your client no appreciable good. On the contrary, it furnished the prosecution with a strong additional weapon against her, a motive.
You forget, Lady Morshampton, retorted Skin-of-My-Tooth, taken aback in spite of himself at this extraordinary display of callousness and egoism. You forget that citing you as a witness would also give me an additional motive in my client's defense.
I don't understand.
The question of time.
Oh, that is very vague, she retorted placidly. I do not wish the servants to know of Mrs. Norris's visit, and that is why I had the hour 10 o'clock, when they were alone at supper. I was on the watch for her and opened the door to her myself. I let her out when our interview was over. I could not tell you at what time that was. I am quite sure that none of the servants even knew that she had been in the house.
But your husband?
Lord Ralph was in the smoking room when Mrs. Norris called. I heard him go out a quarter of an hour or so later, and he certainly did not come in until after she left.
Therefore, if I cite you as a witness...
You do so at Mrs. Norris's risk and peril,
said Lady Ralph Havensham, rising from her chair, and cooler than any cucumber.
I tell you that I could not swear positively what hour she left me, and I know that she took the hansom low down the road. I live in Hamilton Terrace, and it is only 5 minutes' drive at most, I think.
And she added firmly. Then she moved gracefully toward the door.
That I have succeeded in convincing you that it would be more prudent to leave my name out of this case altogether, have I not? Perhaps, after all, Mrs. Norris was wise and did not mention her visit to me, in which case there is no harm done, as I know I can rely on your discretion. By the way, I have not got those letters yet. Will you tell Mrs. Norris that the bargain still holds good? Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Madigan. A very wet spring, is it not? Let us hope we shall have fine weather for the coronation. Don't trouble to see me down. I shall get a hansom myself.
When she had gone, Skin-of-My-Tooth turned to me with a heavy grunt. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Muggins," he said. "Let's have some air. Open the windows. Even the slushy London air is preferable to the moral atmosphere this elegant lady has left behind her." Okay. From what we have heard so far, I'm going to say it was the Lord. Let's see what happens. Part 3. We saw Mrs. Norris in prison that same afternoon. The interview was somewhat stormy, as Skin-of-My-Tooth was furious with her. Nothing enrages him so much as a want of absolute confidence on the part of his client, and I am quite sure that in this instance he would have thrown up the whole case and let Mrs. Norris literally go hang. But for the fact that the ever-increasing mysteries in connection with it had roused out his passion for what was interesting in the history of crime. There was no doubt that Lady Ralph Morshampton's narrative had added fresh mystery to this already bewildering case. Mrs. Norris, sternly questioned by Skin-of-My-Tooth, corroborated it in every detail. The reason why she had so ostensibly held her tongue on the subject was because she felt convinced that her attempt at blackmailing and her avowed interest in obtaining possession of certain letters belonging to her husband had furnished the prosecution with an additional terrible weapon against her. Moreover, she felt instinctively, and there her instinct did not err, that Lady Ralph Morshampton would prove a bitter enemy whom it would be unwise to drag into the case more than absolutely necessary.
"Do not dare tell anyone, Mr. Mulligan," she pleaded pathetically. "Don't be hard upon me. I was quite convinced that something would turn up to prove that I did not commit that awful crime. I don't believe now that justice can err in such an extent."
"You certainly have done your level best to damage your own case," growled Skin of My Tooth, somewhat mollified. "But now tell me, at what time did you leave Lady Ralph Morshampton?"
"It was just before 11. I took a hansom and told the driver to put me down at the corner of Elgin Avenue. Shirley Mansions are just a few yards further on."
"But what about the letters?"
"I haven't got them, Mr. Mulligan. Just before the inquest and before I was accused, I looked for them in their accustomed place, but they had gone."
"Where was the accustomed place?"
"Between some books on the bookshelf. I don't think that my husband attached much importance to them. Anyway, I knew that I could easily get them at any time."
"The police did not find those letters, I know," said Skin of My Tooth to me later that day. "It is clear, therefore, that the murderer succeeded in getting hold of them, and the clearer still that the crime was committed in order to obtain possession of them. Now, if Mrs. Moore speaks the truth, she was with Lady Morshampton until close on 11, when she went straight home."
"Perhaps, after all," I suggested, "Mr. Norris committed suicide, and then his wife, on coming home, merely hunting for the letters and not finding them in their accustomed place, turned the room topsy-turvy before giving the alarm." To my astonishment, Skin of My Tooth did not receive my suggestion with the scorn which I feel it deserved, for he usually bestows upon my attempts in that direction. It was clearest of all to me that my esteemed employer was completely at sea for the moment.
"You shall find out for me, Muggins, whether Mrs. Norris did speak the truth or not. I give you 2 days to do it in. And mind you, don't mention the subject to me during the time. You know how to set to work, of course."
"I think I do, sir. In any case, I will have an advertisement ready for all the daily papers tomorrow, and the police notices all over the town, for the hansom cab driver who drove a lady to Hamilton Terrace in the corner of Elgin Avenue on Thursday, April 17th, at about 11 p.m.
"That's all right, Muggins. You're not quite such an ass as you look. Fire away, then, and whatever you do, don't speak to me for 2 days."
The next morning, my advertisements were in every paper and my notices all over the town. 24 hours after that, I knew the name, address, and number of the cabman who drove a lady at that hour on the day and to the destination I had mentioned. Unfortunately, he had not seen the lady's face, and certainly would not know her again. In the meantime, life at the office was anything but pleasant. Skin of My Tooth was in those tempers of his during which it is not good to talk to him. And that he had got some fixed idea in his mind about that murder, I was then already quite sure. I knew the symptoms well. For all the world like a great frowny hound smelling blood, he sat for hours curled up in his armchair, smoking his long-stemmed German pipe, whilst even his beloved French novels were discarded. Every now and then I would see that weird and cruel spark flash in his lazy blue eyes. Then I knew that the tracker of blood was on the scent, and that he had held a clue, and that his mind had already solved the problem which would bring the murderer of Mr. Norris inevitably to justice. I told him the result of my investigations when the 2 days had elapsed. It was then 10 o'clock in the morning, and we had just both arrived at the office.
"Sit down, Muggins," he said. "I expect a visitor."
I could see that he was very excited. He went himself to the door, when presently a heavy step was heard in the passage. Skin of My Tooth's visitor was a big, burly fellow, wrapped from head to foot in a huge overcoat. The word "cabby" seemed to be written all over his recumbent countenance. He had a copy of the Daily Mail in his hand, to which he was pointing somewhat anxiously as he walked into the room. "You're the gent, ain't you, sir?" he asked presently. "Who put this advertisement in the mail?"
"Yes, I did put that advertisement in, and you got your letter this morning. So you see that I was expecting you. Ah, replied the cabby with a grin of satisfaction. Says here that you'd give a reward of a fiver. What do you want to know about the drove a gent to Hamilton Terrace to somewhere near Elgin House the evening of April 17th? That's it exactly. Now, I drove a swell from top of Carlton Hill to the corner of Elgin Avenue and Mounted Vale about 10:15 that night. It was pouring wet, and when I dropped him, he went into Lord Elgin for a drink. Now, about 3/4 of an hour, the same swell picked me up again just as I was turning into Melvin Rail, and I took him back to Hamilton Terrace. You don't know the number? No, I don't. But I know the swell again if I see him. He gave me a 5 bob each way. I thought he looked as if he'd been drinking with the drove home. His clothes were all anyhow. He had on a silk comforter around his neck, which he left in the cab. I suppose you won't mind throwing that comforter in with most of the valuable information that you've been so good to give me in your suggested Skin My Tooth, and for which I shall have much pleasure in handing you the promised £5 note. A broad grin illuminated the worthy old cabby's countenance. He drew from his pocket a large-colored silk muffler, which he placed on the desk. Then he stretched out a very large and very grimy fist towards a crisp banknote which Skin of My Tooth was holding out towards him. "I'm mighty glad, sir, that my effort and memory is worth all that to you," he said sententiously. "Not to me, cabby," said Skin of My Tooth with a smile, "but to an unfortunate woman whom your excellent memory has saved from the gallows." "Lord, it ain't a case of murder, is it? I don't like that." "Remember that you told this young gentleman here and myself that you would know the swell again," said Skin of My Tooth sternly. Yes, I could," replied the cabby, scratching his scraggy head, "but I don't like to get mixed up in police and things." "Must do something for your £5 note, eh?" "Well, sir, perhaps you're right." He was inclined to be loquacious, but Skin of My Tooth, having got what he wanted, was eager to be rid of him. I showed the amiable cabby out. I was longing to ask my chief for 100 questions, and I found him sitting beside his desk, carefully examining the colored silk muffler. "There are stains on it, Muggins," he said quietly. "I am in an up today." "But I don't understand, sir. What is an advertisement about, and who is this swell who drove from Hamilton Terrace to Elgin and back?" "Why, Muggins, you're a bigger ass than I took you for. The swell, my boy, was Lord Ralph Hampton, and the murderer of Adam Norris. But I suspected at the moment that I saw the very elegant, very egotistical woman of the world, but I was afraid that it would be very difficult to prove. It was, no doubt, all settled between him and his wife. Lord Ralph arranged to have the interview between himself and Mrs. Norris should take place at the moment when it would be most convenient for my lord to tackle an unfortunate dramatic author. This ensured the wife being safely out of the way. I don't suppose for a moment that the murder was premeditated. Lord Ralph Morshampton probably lost his temper, and finding Adam Norris obdurate, knocked him down." "But what made you think of all this, sir?" "Only this, Muggins, that when people tell me a lie, I immediately look about me for the motive which made them tell that particular lie. Lady Ralph Morshampton, if you remember, told me that her husband is a very rich man, and that she had plenty of money at her command with which to gratify any passing whim. Now, that is not true. Lord Ralph Morshampton is a younger brother of the present Marquis de Chamberlain. His father, the late Marquis, left each of his sons an annuity of £3,000 a year, payable out of the estate. My inquiries into Lord Ralph Morshampton's financial position, as compared with the lie of his wife, gave me the first inkling, call it an intuition if you will, the possible state of the case, for clearly Lady Ralph was not indulged in the luxury of buying those letters for £4,000. However eager she was to possess them, her appointment with Mrs. Morris, therefore, was a feint, either in order to gain time or in order to devise some other means of gaining possession of those letters. After that, Muggins, Taking it absolutely for granted that the murder was committed for the sake of those letters, it became easy enough to reduce the number of people interested in their possession to three. There was Mrs. Norris, who wanted to sell them, Lady Ralph Morshampton, who wished to destroy them, and putting aside the question that the murder was really for too gruesome and horrible for any woman to refinement to have committed, it soon became an established fact that the two ladies were actually together at 196 Hamilton Terrace at the time that the murder was being perpetrated. You remember that the people in the flat below, and one accompanied by Mr. Norris, heard the noise and scuffle at 10:30. These were looming before me because the question of Lord Morshampton, the husband. I made inquiries among the servants at Hamilton Terrace and among the neighbors, and learned that he was passionately fond of his wife, and ever eager to hide her past history before his relatives and friends. He, too, then, would have a motive, far stronger than any, since it concerned of the woman he loved, to bury ever the scandal which might injure her position in society. Having got the motive, I soon sought the proof. I remembered that Lady Morshampton herself had said that her husband left the house at 10:15. I surmised that he would go to Sherlock Mansions to see Adam Norris, and since that he would not have had much time at his command, and would go there in a cab. I advertised in terms you know already, and got this morning very proof I sought for. You see, the whole matter became child's play once I had it cleared. It was instinct, sir, I said, with genuine admiration. Marvelous intuition. Call it reflection, my boy, and you'll be about right. You see, the moment those letters were destroyed, the Morshampton's name slipped, as it were, right out of the case. My lady was right when she concluded that I could never have cited Mrs. Morris's behalf. She was quite ready to see the unfortunate woman go to the gallows, and to swear anything that would achieve that end. That is why I am inclined to think that she planned the whole thing, while her husband was on half willing. Now, Muggins, run along and take this muffler to Scotland Yard. Mrs. Norris comes up before the magistrate tomorrow. Poor woman, she has been a narrow shave, but what a fool she has been! Mrs. Norris was discharged by the magistrate. Everyone remembers, no doubt, the awful sensation caused by the suicide of Lord Ralph Morshampton in the house in Hamilton Terrace. There is always a special law for those in his possession. The whole matter of his guilt in the murder of Adam Norris was most effectually hushed up by the police, and the public never got to know the name of the swell who drove the Sherlock Mansions at 10:15 on that fatal night. Called it. As soon as I knew that guy was involved, and he conveniently vanished during the meeting. But we are about to come up on ads. But that was the last of the skin on my tooth. So now I can retire this voice, at least for a little while. But I will... excuse me. See you all in a few minutes. Go take a break, get some water, that kind of thing. Be back in a few. Add to offer. Welcome back. I hope you all had a good break. That's what I was saying. That's the stories in this book for Baroness Orczy. Oh, my closed caption can't get anything right. Anyway, we're switching authors. Again. Yeah, I know. But we get to go to Loveday Brooke. And she's actually meant to be a detective. Which also means I get to do a lot of female voices this time around. So, my usual fun challenge. Yay, I got the trubbish. So our next story, The Experiences of Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective, by C.L. Pirkis, author of Lady Lovelace, A Princess's Vengeance. The girl is young, pretty, friendless, and a foreigner, you say, has disappeared completely as if the earth had opened up and received her, said Miss Brooke, making a resume of the facts that Mr. Dyer had been relating to her. Now, will you tell me why 2 days were allowed to elapse before the police were communicated with? Mrs. Druce, the lady to whom Lucy Kerner acted as an amnesius, answered Mr. Dyer, took the matter very calmly at first, and said she felt sure that the girl would write her to a day or so, explaining her extraordinary conduct. Major Druce, her son, the gentleman who came to me this morning, was away from home on a visit when the girl took flight. Immediately upon his return, however, he communicated the fullest particulars to the police. They do not seem to have taken up the case very heartily in Scotland Yard. No, they have as good as dropped it. They advised Major Druce to place the matter in their hands, saying that they considered it a case for a private rather than a police investigation. I wonder what made them come to that conclusion. I think I can tell you, although the Major seemed quite at a loss in the matter. It seems he had a photograph of the missing girl, which he kept in a drawer on his writing table. By the way, I think the young man is a good deal gone with his mind will come here, in spite of his engagement to another lady. Well, this portrait he naturally thought would be most useful in helping us trace the girl, and he went to his drawer for it, intending to take it with him to Scotland Yard. To his astonishment, however, it was nowhere to be seen, and although he at once instituted a rigorous search, and questioned his mother and all the servants in the matter, it was all to no purpose. Loveday thought for a moment. Well, of course, she said presently. That photograph must have been stolen by someone in the house, and equally of course that someone must know more on the matter than he or she cares to avow, and most probably has some interest in throwing obstacles in the way of tracing the girl. At the same time, however, the facts in no way disproves the possibility that a crime, and a very black one, may underlie the girl's disappearance. The Major himself appears confident that a crime of some sort has been committed, and he grew very excited and a little mixed in his statements more than once just now. What sort of woman is the Major's mother? Mrs. Druce? She is rather a well-known personage in certain sets. Her husband died about 10 years ago, and since his death, she has posed as a promoter and propagandist of all sorts of behavior, and all sorts of benevolent, though occasionally somewhat visionary ideas. Theatrical missions, magic lantern, and playing card missions, societies for providing perpetual music for the sick poor, for supplying cabmen with comforters, and 100 other similar schemes have in turn occupied her attention. Her house is a rendezvous for faddists of every description. The latest fad, however, seems to have put all others to flight. But a scheme for alleviating the condition of our sisters in the East, so she puts it in her prospectus. In other words, a harem mission on somewhat similar, but I suppose broader lines than the old-fashioned Zenana mission. This harem mission has gathered about her a number of Turkish and Egyptian potentates residents in or visiting London, and has thus incidentally brought about the engagement of her son, Major Druce, with the Princess de Loveday. The princess is a beauty and an heiress, and although of Turkish parentage, has been brought up under European influences in Cairo.
Is anything known about the accidents of Mademoiselle Kerner?
Very little. She came to Mrs. Druce from a certain Lady Gwyn, who had been brought to her by England as an orphanage for the daughters of jewelers and watchmakers in Chalets and Geneva. Lady Gwyn intended to make her governess to her young children, but saw when that the girl's good looks had attracted her husband's attention, she thought that the mademoiselle might be useful to her conducting her foreign correspondence. Mrs. Druce accordingly engaged the young lady to act as her secretary in the Ammonius, and appears on the whole to have taken to the girl, and to have been on a pleasant, friendly footing with her. I wonder if the Princess Duleve was on an equally pleasant footing with her when she saw, as no doubt she did, the attention she received from the Major's hands. Mr. Dryer shrugged his shoulders. The Major's suspicions do not point out that direction, in spite of the fact which I've elicited from him the judicious questioning, that the princess has a violent and jealous temper, and has at times made his life a burden to him. His suspicions center solely upon a certain Hafiz Kazemi, son of a Turkish-Egyptian banker of that name. It was at the house of this Cassini's that the Major first met the princess, and he states that she and the young Casimini are like brother and sister to each other. He says that this young man has had a run of mother's house and made himself very much at home in it for the past 3 weeks, ever since, in fact, the princess came to stay with Mrs. Druce, in order to be initiated in the mysteries of English family life. Hafiz Kasimi, according to the mayor's account, fell desperately in love with the little Swiss girl almost at first sight, and pestered her with his attentions, and off and on these appear to have passed hot words between the two young men.
One could scarcely expect a princess with Eastern blood in her veins to sit to quiet a passive spectator with such a drama of circumstances.
Scarcely. The Major, perhaps, hardly takes the princess sufficiently into his reckoning. According to him, Yakasimi was a thorough-going Iago, and he begs to concentrate attentively, entirely on him. Cassimi, he says, has stolen the photograph. Cassimi has invited the girl out of the house on some pretext, perhaps out of the country also, and he suspects that it might be to communicate with the police in Cairo with as little delay as possible.
And it hasn't so much as entered his mind that the princess might have had a hand in such a plot as this?
Apparently not. I think I told you that Mademoiselle has taken no luggage, not so much as a big handbag with her. Nothing beyond the coat and hat has disappeared from her wardrobe. Her writing desk, and, in fact, all of her boxes and drawers, have been opened and searched, but no letters or papers of any sort have been found that throw any light on her movements.
At what hour in the day is the girl supposed to have left the house?
No one can say for certain. It is conjectured that it was some time in the afternoon of the 2nd of this month, a week ago today. It was one of Mrs. Druce's big reception days, and with the stream of young people coming and going, a young lady, more or less, leaving the house would scarcely be noticed.
I suppose, said Loveday, after a moment's pause, this Princess de Loveday has something of a history. One does not often get a Turkish princess in London.
Yes, she has a history. She's only remotely connected with the present reigning dynasty in Turkey, and I dare say her princessship has been made the most of. All the same, however, she has had an altogether exceptional career for an Oriental lady. She was left an orphan at an early age and was consigned to guardianship of the elder Cassimi by her relatives. The Cassimis, both father and son, seemed to be very advanced and European in their ideas, and by them she was taken to Cairo for her education. About a year ago they brought her out in London, where she made the acquaintance of Major Druce. The young man, by the way, appears to be rather hot-headed in his love-making, for within 6 weeks of his introduction to her their engagement was announced. No doubt it was Mrs. Druce's fullest approval, for knowing her son's extravagant habits and his numerous debts, it must have been a patent to her that a rich wife was a necessity to him. The marriage, I believe, was also to be taking place this season, but taking into consideration the young man's ill-advised attentions to this little Swiss girl, and the fever he is throwing into his search for her, I should say that it was exceedingly doubtful whether Major Druce, sir, wishes to see you, said the clerk at that moment, opening the door leading to the outer office. Very good, show him in, said Mr. Dyer, then turned to Loveday. Of course, I have spoken to him about you. He is very anxious to take you to his mother's reception this afternoon, and that you may have a look around and... He broke off, having to rise and greet Major Druce, who at the moment entered the room. He was a tall, handsome young fellow of about 7 or 8 and 20, well turned out from head to foot, mustache waxed and orchid in his buttonhole, light kid gloves, and patent leather boots. There was assuredly nothing in his appearance to substantiate his statement to Mr. Dyer that he hadn't slept a wink all night, and that another 24 hours of this terrible suspense would send him into his grave. Mr. Dyer introduced Mrs. Brooke, and she expressed her sympathy with him on the painful matter that was filling his thoughts. "This is very good of you, I'm sure," he replied in a slow, soft drawl, not unpleasant to listen to. "My mother receives this afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30, and I shall be very glad if you allow me to introduce you to the inside of our house, and to the very ill-looking set that we have somehow managed to gather about us."
Ill-looking set?
Yes, Turks, Jews, heretics, infidels, all there. And they're on the incense, too. That's the worst of it. Every week a fresh importation from Cairo.
Mrs. Druce is a large-hearted...
Mrs. Druce is a large-hearted, benevolent woman, interposed Mr. Dyer. All nationalities gather within her walls.
Was your mother a large-hearted, benevolent woman?
No. Dang it. Was your mother a large-hearted, benevolent woman? Said the young man, turning upon him. No. Well then, thank Providence that she wasn't. And admit that you know nothing at all in the matter. Miss Brooke, he continued, turning to Loveday, I've brought round my hansom for you. It's nearly 4:30 now, and it's a good 20 minutes' drive from here to Portland Place. If you're ready, I'm at your service. Major Druce's hansom was, like himself in all respects, well turned out, and the india-rubber tires round its wheels allowed an easy flow of conversations to be kept up during the 20 minutes' drive from Lynch Court to Portland Place. The Major led off the talk in frank and easy fashion. My mother, he said, prides herself on being cosmopolitan in her tastes, and now we have a very cosmopolitan indeed. Even our servants respect the various nationalities. The butler is French, and 2 footmen Italians, and the maids, I believe, Some of them German, some Irish, and I've no doubt if you penetrated the kitchen quarters, you'll find the staff there composed of part of the Scandinavians and part of the South Sea Islanders. The other quarters of the globe you will find fully represented in the drawing room. Loveday had a direct question to ask.
Are you certain that Mademoiselle Kerner had no friends in England?
She said. I'm positive. She hadn't a friend in the world outside my mother's four walls, poor child. She told me more than once she was like a sweet solitaire. He broke off for a moment, as if to overcome a sad memory, then added, "But I'll put a bullet into him, take my word for it, if she isn't found within another 24 hours. Personally, I should prefer settling the brute in that fashion to handing him over to the police." His face flushed a deep red. There came a sudden flash to his eyes. But for all that, his voice was as soft and slow and unemotional, as though he were talking of nothing more serious than bringing down a partridge. There fell a brief pause, then Loveday asked another question.
Is Mademoiselle Catholic or Protestant? Can you tell me?
The Major thought for a moment. Then he replied, "Upon my word, I don't know. She used sometimes to attend a little church in South Saville Street. I walked with her occasionally to the church door, but I couldn't for the life of me say whether it was Catholic, Protestant, or pagan place of worship. But you haven't think those confounded priests have...
Here we are. Here we are at Portland Place, interrupted Loveday. Mrs. Druce's rooms are already full, to judge from that long line of carriages."
"Miss Brooke," said the Major suddenly, bethinking himself of his responsibilities, "how am I to introduce you? What role will you take up this afternoon? Pose as a faddist of some sort, if you want to win my mother's heart. What do you say to having started a grand scheme for supplying Hottentots and coffers with eyeglasses? My mother would swear eternal friendship with you at once."
"Don't introduce me at all at first," answered Loveday. "Get me into some quiet corner where I can see without being seen. Later on in the afternoon, when I have had time to look around a little, I will tell you whether it will be necessary to introduce me or not."
"It will be a mob this afternoon, no mistake," said Major Druce, as, side by side, they entered the house. "Do you hear that fizzing and clucking behind us? That's Arabic, and you'll get in whiffs between gusts of French and German all this afternoon. The Egyptian contingent seems to be in full force today. I don't see any Choctaw Indians, but I no doubt they'll send their representative later on. Come in at this side door, and we'll work our way around that big palm. My mother is sure to see at the principal doorway." The drawing rooms were packed from end to end, and Major Druce's progress as he headed Loveday through the crowd was impeded by handshaking and interchange of civilities with his mother's guests. Eventually, a big palm standing in a Chinese cistern was reached, and from there, half screened from view by its graceful branches, he placed a chair for Miss Brooke. From this quiet nook, and now and again the crowd parted, Loveday could command a fair view of both drawing rooms.
"Don't distract attention to me by standing at my elbow,"
she whispered to the Major. He answered her whisper with another. "There's the beast Iago, I mean. Do you see him? He's standing talking to that fair, handsome woman in a pale green dress with a picture hat. She's Lady Gwen. And there's my mother, and there's Dolly, the princess, I mean, alone on the sofa. You can't see her now for the crowd. Yes, I'll go, but if you want me, just nod to me and I'll understand." It was easy to see what had brought such a fashionable crowd to Mrs. Druce's rooms that afternoon. Every caller, as soon as she had shaken hands with the hostess, passed on to the princess's sofa, and there waited patiently till opportunity presented itself for an introduction to her Eastern Highness. Loveday found it impossible to get more than a mere glimpse of her, and so transferred her attention to Mr. Hafiz Cassini, who had been referred to in such unceremonious language by Major Druce. He was a swarthy, well-featured man with bold black eyes and lips that had a habit of parting now and again, not to smile, but as if to show no other purpose than to show a double row of gleaming white teeth. The European dress he wore seemed to accord ill with the man, and Loveday could fancy that those black eyes and that double row of white teeth would have better be shown an advantage beneath a turban or a fez cap. From Cassimi, her eyes wandered to Mrs. Druce, a tall, stout woman dressed in black velvet, and with her hair mounted high on her head, that had an appearance of being either bleached or powdered. She gave Loveday the impression of being that essentially modern product of modern society, the woman who combines in one person the hard-working philanthropist and the hard-working woman of fashion. As rivals began to slacken, she left her post near the door and began to make her round of the room. From snatches of talk that came to her where she sat, Loveday could gather that, with one hand, as it were, this energetic lady was organizing a grand charity concert, and with the others pushing the interests of a big ball that was shortly to be given by the officers of her son's regiment. It was a hot June day, and in spite of the closed blinds and open windows, the room was stifling to a degree. The butler, a small, dark, slight Frenchman, made his way through a throng to a window at Loveday's right hand, to see if a little more air could be admitted. Major Druce followed on his heels to Loveday's side. "Will you come into the next room and have some tea?" he asked. "I'm sure you must be nearly suffocated here." He broke off, then added in a lower tone, "I hope you have kept your eyes on the beast. Did you ever in your life see a more repulsive-looking animal?" Loveday took his questions in their order. "No tea, thank you," she said, "but I shall be glad if you will tell your butler to bring me a glass of water. There he is, at your elbow. Yes, off and on, I have seen studying Mr. Cassimi, and I must admit I do not like his smileless smile." The butler brought the water. The major, much to his annoyance, was seized upon simultaneously by two ladies, one eager to know if any tidings had been received from Mademoiselle Conyers, and the other anxious to learn if a distinguished president to the harem mission had been decided upon. Soon after 6, the rooms began to thin somewhat, and presentations to the princess ceasing, Loveday was able to get a full view of her. She presented a striking picture, seated half-reclining on a sofa, with two white-robed, dark-skinned Egyptian maidens standing beside her. A more unfortunate subject than Dolly could scarcely have been found by the major for this oriental beauty, with her olive complexion and her flashing eyes and extravagant richness of attire. Queen of Sheba would be more appropriate, thought Loveday. She turns a commonplace sofa into a throne, and I should say makes every one of those ladies feel as if she ought to have donned court dress and plumes for the occasion. It was difficult for her, from where she sat, to follow the details of the princess's dress. She could only see that a quantity of soft orange-tinted silk was wound about her upper part of her arms, and fell from her shoulders like drooping wings, and that here and there jewels flashed out from the folds. Her thick black hair was loosely knotted, and kept in its place by jeweled pins and a bandeau of pearls, and similar bandeaus adorned her slender throat and wrists. "Are you lost in admiration?" said the major, once more at her elbow, in the slightest sarcastic tone. "That sort of thing is very taking and effective at first, but after a time—" He did not finish his sentence, shrugged his shoulders, and walked away. 6:30 chimed in a small clock on the bracket. Carriage after carriage was rolling away from the door now, and progress on the stairs was rendered difficult by a descending crowd. 7:15 struck, and the last handshaking had been done through, and Mrs. Druce, looking hot and tired, had sunk into a chair at the princess's right hand, bending slightly forward to render conversation with her lady. At the princess's left hand, Lady Gwyn had taken a chair and sat in converse with Hafiz Kasimi, who stood behind her. Evidently, these four were on very easy and intimate terms with each other. Lady Gwyn had tossed her big picture hat on the chair at her far left hand and was fanning herself with a palm leaf. Mrs. Roos, beckoning to the butler, desired him to bring them some claret cup from the refreshment room. No one seemed to observe Loveday seated in her nook beside the big palm. She signaled to the Major, who stood looking discontentedly from her to the windows.
"That is a most interesting group," she said. "Now, if you like, you may introduce me to your mother."
"Oh, with pleasure. Under what name?" he asked.
"Under my own," she answered. "And please be very distinct in pronouncing it. Raise your voice slightly so that every one of those persons may hear it. And then please add my profession, and say I am here at your request to investigate the circumstances connected with Mademoiselle Conyers' disappearance."
Major Druce looked astounded. But, he stammered, have you seen anything, found anything out? If not, don't you think it'd be better to preserve your incognita a little longer?"
"Don't stop to ask questions," said Loveday sharply. "Now, this very minute, do what I ask you, or the opportunity will be gone."
The Major, without further demur, escorted Loveday across the room. The conversation between the four intimate friends had now become general and animated, and he had to wait for a moment or so before they could get an opportunity to speak to his mother. During that minute, Loveday stood a little to his rear, with Lady Gwyn and Kasimi at her right hand. "I want to introduce you to this lady," said the Major, with a pause in the talk that gave him this opportunity. "This is Miss Loveday Brooke, a lady detective, and she is here at my request to investigate the circumstances connected with the disappearance of Mademoiselle Conyers." He said the words slowly and distinctly. "There," he said to himself complacently as he ended. "If I had been reading the lessons in church, I couldn't have been more emphatic." A blank silence for a moment fell upon the group, and even the butler, just then entered with the claret cup, came to a standstill at the door. Then simultaneously, a flash glance from Mrs. Douce to Lady Gwyn, from Lady Gwyn to Mrs. Douce, and then also simultaneously both ladies rested, though only for an instant, on the big picture hat lying on the chair. Lady Gwyn started to her feet and seized her hat, adjusting it without so much as a glance of a mirror.
"I must go at once, this very minute," she said. "I promised Charlie I would be back soon after 6. Now it is past 7. Mr. Kasimi, will you take me down to my carriage?"
And with the most hurried of leave-takings to the princess and the hostess, the ladies swept out of the room, followed by Mr. Kasimi. The butler, still standing at the door, drew back to allow the lady to pass, and then, claret cup and all, followed her out of the room. Mrs. Druce drew a long breath and then bowed formally to Loveday.
"I was a little taken by surprise," she began.
But here the princess rose suddenly to the sofa.
"Je suis fatiguée,"
she said in excellent French to Mrs. Douce, and she too swept out of the room, throwing as she passed what seemed to Loveday's a slightly scornful glance towards the mayor. Her two attendants, one carrying her fan and the other her reclining cushions, followed. Mrs. Druce again turned to Loveday.
"Yes, I must confess I am a little taken by surprise,"
she said, with her mouth on her thumb slightly.
"I am not accustomed to the presence of detectives in my house. But now tell me what you propose doing. How do you mean to begin your investigation? By going over the house and looking in all the corners, or by cross-questioning the servants? Forgive my asking, but I really am at quite a loss. I haven't the remotest idea how such investigations are generally conducted." "I do not propose to do much in the way of investigation tonight," answered Loveday, as formally as she had been addressed, "for I have very important business to transact before 8 o'clock this evening. I shall ask you to allow me to see Mademoiselle Curran's room. 10 minutes after. Well, 10 minutes there will be sufficient. After that, I do not think I need further trouble you. Certainly, by all means, answered Mistress. You'll find the room exactly as Lucy left it. Nothing has been disturbed.
She turned to the butler, who had by this time returned, and said presently, with the claret cup, and in French, desired him to summon her maid and tell her to show Miss Brooke to Mademoiselle Turner's room. 10 minutes that Loveday had said would suffice for her survey of this room extended themselves to 15, but the extra 5 minutes assuredly were not expended by her in the investigation of drawers and boxes. The maid, a pleasant, well-spoken young woman, jingled her keys and opened every lock, and seemed not at all disinclined to enter into the light gossip that Loveday contrived to get going. She answered freely a variety of questions that Loveday put to her respecting Mademoiselle and her general habits, and from Mademoiselle the talk drifted to other members of the Mrs. Drew's household. If Loveday had, as she stated, important business to transact that evening, she certainly set about it in a strange fashion. After she quitted Mademoiselle's room, she went straight out of the house without leaving a message of any sort for either Mr. or Major Druce. She walked the length of Portland Place in leisurely fashion, and then, having first ascertained that her movements were not being watched, she called a hansom, and desired the man to drive her to Mademoiselle Celine's, a fashionable milliner's in Old Bond Street. At Mademoiselle Celine's she spent close to upon half an hour, giving many and minute directions of making of a hat, which, assuredly, when finished, would compare with nothing in the way of millinery that she had ever put on her head. From Mademoiselle Celine's the hansom conveyed her to an undertaker's shop at the corner of South Saville Street, and here she spent a brief 10 minutes in conversation with the undertaker himself in his little black parlor. From the undertaker's she drove home to her rooms in Gower Street, and then, before she divested herself of hat and coat, she wrote a brief note to Major Druce requesting him to meet her on the following morning at Egg Glacés, the confectioner's, in the South Saville Street, at 9 o'clock punctually. This note she committed to the charge of the cab driver, desiring him to deliver it at Portland Place on his way back to his stand. "They have queer ways of doing things, these people," said the Major, as he opened and read the note. "I suppose I must be kept the appointment, confound it. I can't see that she possibly found anything by just sitting still in the corner for a couple of hours. And I'm confident she didn't give that beast Cassini 1/4 of the attention she bestowed on the other people." In spite of his grumbling, however, the Major kept his appointment. At 9 o'clock the next morning she saw him shaking hands with Miss Brooke at the Eglass's doorstep.
"Does Mr. Handsome," she said to him, "I only want you to come in for a few doors down the streets, to the French Protestant church, to which you have sometimes escorted Mademoiselle Contia."
At the church door, Loveday paused a moment.
"Before we enter," she said, "I want you to promise that whatever you may see going on in there, however greatly you may be surprised, you will make no disturbance, not so much as open your lips till we come out."
The Major, not a little bewildered, gave his required promise, and side by side the two entered the church. It was little more than a big room. At the farther end, in the middle of the nave, stood the pulpit, and immediately behind this was a low platform, enclosed by a brass rail. Behind the brass rail, a little black Geneva gown stood in the pasture of the church, and before him, on cushions, kneeled two persons, a man and a woman. These two persons, and an old man, the converter, formed the whole of the congregation. The position of the church amid shops and narrow backyards had necessitated the filling of every one of its windows with stained glass. It was, consequently, so dim that, coming in from the outside glare of the sunlight, the Major found it difficult to make out what was going on the farther end. The verger came forward and offered to show him to a seat. Loveday shook her head, and they would be leaving in a minute, she said, and would prefer standing where they were. The major began to take it in the major began to take in the situation. "Why, they're being married," he said in a low whisper. "What on earth have you brought me here in for?" Loveday laid a finger on her lips and frowned severely at him. The marriage service came to an end. The pastor extended his black-gowned arms like the wings of a bat and produced the benediction. The man and woman rose from their knees and proceeded to follow him to the vestry. The woman was neatly dressed in a long dove-colored traveling gown. She wore a large hat from which fell a white gossamer veil that completely hid her face from view. The man was small, dark, and slight, and as he passed on the vestry beside his bride, the major at once identified him as his mother's butler. "Why, that's Lebrun," he said in a loud whisper before. Said in a still louder whisper than before. "Why, the name of all what's wonderful, have you brought me here to see that fellow married?" "You'd better come outside if you can't keep quiet," she said severely, and leading the way out of the church as she spoke. Outside, South Seville Street was busy with early morning traffic. "Let us go back to our glasses," said Loveday, "and have some coffee. I'll explain to you there all you are wishing to know." But before the coffee could be brought to them, the major had asked at least 24 questions. Loveday put them all on one side. "All in good time," she said. "You're leaving out the most important question of all. You have no curiosity to who was the bride that Lebrun was chosen." "I don't suppose it concerns me in the slightest degree," he answered indifferently. "But since you wish me to ask the question, who was she?" "Lucy Cunningham, lately your mother's amanuensis." "The," cried the major, jumping to his feet and uttering an exclamation that must be indicated by a blank. "Take it calmly," said Loveday. "Don't rave. Sit down and I'll tell you all about it. Now it is not the doing of your friend Cassini. You have no need to threaten to put a bullet in him. The girl has married Lebrun of her own free will. No one has forced her onto it." "Lucy has married Lebrun of her own free will?" he echoed, grown very white and taking a chair which faced Loveday at the little table. "Will you have sugar?" asked Loveday, stirring the coffee which the waiter at that moment brought. "Yes, I repeat," she presently resumed. "Lucy has married Lebrun of her own free will, although I conjecture she might not, perhaps, be quite so willing to crown his happiness if Princess Tillivet had not made it greatly her interest to do so." "Dolly made it her interest to do so?" again echoed the major. "Do not interrupt me with exclamations. Let me tell you the story in my own fashion, and then you may ask as many questions as you please. Now, to begin at the beginning, Lucy became engaged to Lebrun within a month of her coming to your mother's house, but she carefully kept the secret from everyone, even from the servants, until a month ago, when she mentioned the fact in confidence to Mrs. Druce, in order to defend herself from the charge of having sought to attract your attention. There was nothing surprising in this engagement. They were both lonely and in a foreign land, and spoke the same language, and no doubt had many things in common, and although chance has lifted Lucy somewhat out of her station, she really belongs to the same class in life as Lebrun. Their love-making appears to have run along smoothly enough until you came home on leave, and the girl's pretty face attracted your attention. Your evident admiration for her disturbed the equanimity of the princess, who saw your devotion to her so waning. Of Lebrun, who fancied Lucy's manner to him had changed. Of your mother, who was anxious that you should make a suitable marriage. Also, additional complications arose from the fact that your attentions to the little Swiss girl had drawn Mr. Cassini's notice to her numerous attractions, and there was danger of you two men posing as rivals. At this juncture, Lady Gwyn, as an intimate friend, and one who had herself suffered the twinge of heartache at Mademoiselle's account,
was taken into your mother's confidence, and the three ladies in council decided that Lucy, in some fashion, must be got out of the way before you and Mr. Cassini came to an open breach, and you had spoilt your matrimonial prospects.
Here the Major made a slightly impatient movement. Loveday went on.
It was a princess who solved the question how this was begun. Fair Rosamonds are no longer put out of the way by a cup of cold poison. Gold guineas do the thing far more easily and innocently. The princess expressed her willingness to bestow £1,000 on Lucy on the day that she married Lebrun, and to set her up afterwards in a fashionable milliner in Paris. After this munificent effort, everything else became a mere matter of detail. The main thing was to get the damsel out of the way without your being able to trace her, perhaps work on her feelings and induce her, at the last moment, to throw over Lebrun. Your absence from home on 3 days' visit gave him a wished-for opportunity. Lady Gwyn took her milliner into confidence. Madame Celine consented to receive Lucy into her house, seclude her in a room on the upper floor, at the same time give her an insight into the profession of a fashionable milliner. The rest I think you know. Lucy quietly walks out of the house one afternoon, taking no luggage, calling no cab, and therefore cutting off one very obvious means of being traced. Madame Celine receives and hides her, not a difficult feat to accomplish in London, more especially if the one to be hidden is a foreigner Lucis, who is seldom seen out of doors, and who leaves no photograph behind her. I suppose it was Lebrun who had the confounded cheek to go.
I suppose it was Lebrun who had the confounded cheek to go into my drawer and appropriate that photograph. I wish it had been Cassini. I could have kicked him, but it makes one feel rather small to have posed as a rival to one's mother's butler.
I think you may congratulate yourself that Lebrun did nothing worse than to go to your drawer and appropriate that photograph. I never saw a man bestow a more deadly look of hatred than he threw at you yesterday in your mother's drawing room. It was that look of hatred that first drew my attention to the man, and set me on the track that was ended in the Swiss Protestant church this morning.
Let me hear about that. Let me have the links in the chain, one by one, as you came upon them, said the Major. He was still pale, almost as the marble table at which they sat, but his voice had gone back to its normal, slow drawl.
With pleasure. The look from Lebrun threw at you as he crossed the room to open the window was link number 1. I saw the look. I said to myself, there is someone in the corner who has hatred toward the man, deadly hatred. Then you came forward to speak to me, and I saw that it was you that the man was ready to murder, if opportunity offered. After this, I scrutinized him closely. Not a detail of his features or his dress escaped me, and I noticed, among other things, that on the 4th finger of his left hand, half hidden by a more prestigious ring, was an old-fashioned, curious-looking silver one. That silver ring was his link number 2 in the chain.
I suppose you asked for that glass of water on purpose to get a closer view of the ring.
I did. I found it was a generous ring of ancient make, like which I had not seen since I was a child and played with one, that my old Swiss bonnet used to wear. Now, I must tell you a little about Genevieve's history, before I can make you understand how important the link that silver ring was to me. In Charlotte, the town in which Lucy was born, and her father had kept a watchmaker's shop, has long been famous for its jewelry and watchmaking. The two trades, however, did not combine until about 100 years ago, when the corporation of the town passed a law decreeing that they should unite in one guild for their common good. To celebrate this amalgamation of interests, the jewelers fabricated a certain number of silver rings consisting of a plain band of silver in which 2 hands in relief clasped each other. These rings were distributed among the members of the guild, and as time has gone on, have become scarce and valuable as relics of the past. In certain families, they've been handed down as heirlooms and have frequently done duty as betrothal rings, or clasped hands, no doubt suggesting their suitability for the purpose. Now, when I saw such a ring on Lebrun's finger, I naturally guessed from whom he had received it, and at once classed his interests with those of your mother and the princess, and looked upon him as a possible coadjutor.
What made you throw the brute Cassini altogether out of your reckoning?
I did not do so at this state of the events, only, so to speak, marked him as doubtful, and kept my eye on him. I determined to try an experiment that I have never before attempted in my work. You know what an experiment is. I saw 5 persons, Mrs. Douce, the princess, Lady Gwyn, Mr. Cassini, and Lebrun, all in the room within a few yards of each other, and I asked you to take them by surprise and announce my name and profession, so that every one of those 5 persons could hear you.
You did. I could not for the life of me make out what was your motive for doing such.
My motive for doing so was simply, as it were, to raise a sudden cry, "The enemy is upon you!" to set every one of those 5 persons guarding the weak point. That is, if they had one. I'll draw your attention to what followed. Mr. Cassini remained nonchalant and impassive. Your mother and Lady Gwyn exchanged glances, and then both simultaneously threw a nervous look at Lady Gwyn's hat lying on the chair. Now, as I had stood waiting to be introduced to Mrs. Douce, I casually read the name of Madame Celine's on the lining of the hat. I at once concluded that Madame Celine must be a very weak point indeed. A conclusion that was confirmed when Lady Gwyn hurriedly seized her hat and hurriedly departed. Then the princess scarcely less abrupt rose and left the room, and Lebrun, on the point of entering, quitted it also. When he returned 5 minutes later with a claret cup, he had removed the ring from his finger, so I had little doubt where his weak point lay.
It's wonderful. It's like a fairy tale, drawled the Major. Pray, go on.
After this,
Loveday continued,
my work became very simple. I did not care 2 straws for seeing Mademoiselle's room, but I cared very much to have a talk with Mrs. Douce's maid. From her I elicited the important fact that Lebrun was leaving very unexpectedly on the following day, and that his boxes were packed and labeled for Paris. After I left your house, I drove to Madame Celine's, and there, as a sort of entrance fee, I ordered an elaborate hat. I praised freely that the hats they had on view, and while giving minute directions as to the one I required, I extracted information that Madame Celine had recently taken on a new milliner and had a very great artistic skill. Upon this, I asked permission to see this new milliner and give her special instructions concerning my hat. The request was referred to Madame Celine, who appeared much ruffled by it, and informed me that it would be quite useless for me to see this new milliner, that she could execute no more orders, as she was leaving the next day for Paris, where she intended opening an establishment on her own account. Now you see the point at which I had arrived. There was Lebrun, and there was this new milliner, each leaving for Paris on the same day. It was not unreasonable to suppose that they start in company, and that before so going, a little ceremony might be gone through in the Swiss Protestant church that Mademoiselle occasionally attended. This conjecture sent me to the undertaker at South Seville Street, who combines with his undertaking the office of little verger with the local church. From him I learned that the marriage was to take place at the church at 8:45 the next morning, and that the names of the contracting parties were Pierre Lebrun and Lucie Signon.
Kiernan?
Yes, that's the girl's real name. It seems Lady Gwyn rechristened her Cunnier, because she said the English pronunciation of Quinn and granted it on her ear. People would insist upon adding the G after the N. She introduced her as Mrs. Douce under the name of Cunnier, forgetting, perhaps, the girl's real name, or else thinking it a matter of no importance. This fact, no doubt, considerably lessened de Bruyn's fear of detection, procuring his lessons and transmitting it to the Swiss pastor. Perhaps you are a little surprised at my knowledge of the facts I related to you at the beginning of this conversation. I got them through the Brun this morning. At 8:30 I went down to the church and found him there, waiting his new bride. He grew terribly excited at seeing me and thought I was going to bring you down to him and upset his wedding arrangements at the last moment. I assured him to the contrary, and his version of the facts I have handed on to you. Should, however, any details of the story seem to you to be lacking, I have no doubt that Mrs. Druce or the princess will supply them. Now, that all necessity for secrecy has come to an end.
The Major drew on his gloves. His color had come back to him, and he had resumed his easy suavity of manner. "I don't think," he said slowly, "I'll trouble my mother or the princess, and I shall be glad if you have the opportunity, if you will make people understand that I only moved in the matter at all out of mere kindness to a young and friendless foreigner." Yay! Whew. Well, we are 8 minutes out from ads again. How long is this next story? The next story is 14 pages, so it's actually longer than this one was. I'm not sure if I have it in me. But this would leave 3 stories until the end of the book, as opposed to 2. I want to finish the book next week, so I will go ahead and close off for tonight. And let's see who might be on. Well, Dusk is doing art. And Harp Griffin is doing Sherlock Holmes. So do we want more mystery? Or do we want some showtime watching art? I said showtime, not showtime. You silly little closed caption thing. Anyway, anyone have a choice? Preference? Or whatever? Anyone? Anyone? Try? Oh. Well, let's keep on theme. So, that will be Rainier Griffin. Those are our messages as per usual. I do hope everyone has a wonderful evening. I will be doing fairy tales tomorrow, provided the fairies don't take me away. or give me some reason not to. So, fucking spell. You only have one viewer? Oh, I don't guess I have to raid. But anyway, I hope all of you here enjoyed the stories and have a wonderful night. And I hope that I see you all tomorrow for our Friday night fairy tales. Good night, all.